I can see him. Sit down, Mills. Can you see the wolf? Look, down there, look. You see him? Look down there, look, asleep.
Do we have the right to control the world? Do we have a right to dominate it? Do other life forms matter?
I'm Abby, and this is Pups, me and my bestie. This, for me, is where it all started. Pups was the catalyst for my wolf journey. His love, his companionship, and his amazing spirit led me to where I am today. I watched Pups closely over the years, from puppy to dog, and from playful to more playful. As I watched him, it got me thinking about his ancestors. We love dogs. We treasure them. We welcome them. We care for them. So why are wolves so bad and suffer the stigma of villain? Why and how did this divergence in perception occur? This film is the story of my search to understand the wolf, without the stories, the myths, the historical misinformation. Just the wolf in its world and listening to them speak. I needed some sort of context, so decided to start with the history. I needed to know what the origins of this wolf hatred was.
Little Bo Peep had lost her sheep while out in the meadow green. They wandered close by some wolves who were sly, and soon by these wolves they were seen. These nasty old wolves dressed one of their kind to look like Little Bo Peep. Out he did go with one thought in mind, to capture the poor little sheep.
Like many children, my early influences came from stories, and the wolf featured in many. But it was a never-ending story that captivated me more than any other story. The wolf Gmork is terrifying, but I found myself drawn to him. His power is the embodiment of nature in its full glory.
The only one who could have stopped the night.
I got used to seeing wolves in the same context, the villain, but it didn't scare me.
You're gonna get what you deserve.
The wolf. I wasn't afraid of the big bad wolf. I was captivated. I became slightly obsessed with werewolves. It felt strange because it wasn't real and something was definitely missing. So even though the wolf is maligned and portrayed as bad, I didn't see it that way. Gary Marvin is a professor of human-animal studies. I came across his book Wolf while conducting research on the history of wolves. In it, he presents the latest scientific understanding of the wolf, as well as its place in literature, history and folklore.
The wolf was one of the most, perhaps the most extensive land mammals in the world. And so it lived all the way across the circumpolar region, all the way through North America, down into central parts of South America, and across Europe. The wolf, this one particular creature, intersected with a huge variety of cultures. Different cultures, same animal, or is it the same animal?
We don't know whether we had a symbiotic relationship with this animal ever in the British Isles. It's very reasonable to suppose that in Mesolithic times, perhaps in the Bronze Age, in the Iron Age, when you find costumes and engravings on artifacts of people in the skins of animals with antlers, that again there must have been some sort of totemic connection with the wolf. It was there with seals, it was there with deer, it must have been with this great and able hunter too.
Many people, don't realize that they were actually here before we were, So this is a very, very wise species. They're incredibly intuitive. And so it's obvious to me that we depended on the wolf for our survival. There's something there that's very ancient, very precious, and very real when it comes to our relationship with the wolf. There's been scientific evidence that, wolf and humans, early humans, worked together and lived together, and you can only imagine the benefit.
So wolves are excellent at picking out an animal that's vulnerable. And so they would come upon a herd of, let's say, elk, and chase the elk and pick out the one that was most vulnerable, cut it out from the herd. And now here's where the humans come in. We had spears. We had atlatls. We could kill the animal from a distance. So we didn't have to run the animal down. The wolves did that. The wolves didn't have to make the final kill. And, wolves can die making that final kill. They can get kicked in the head, kicked in the lungs, anywhere, and die from trying to bring down a big animal.
A lot of the perception of wolves has been generated in young children by Little Red Riding Hood. And out there in the literature, there's an awful lot about wolves who attack people and packs of wolves hunting down people. And of course, in the United States, this image of the wolf is propagated by the hunters and by the farmers.
I became interested in wolves because they had been persecuted and scapegoated by humans, starting in Europe, a lot in England, and that came over with colonizers to North America. But the objective was to kill them all off, and that was the policy for centuries.
People have had fear of them throughout the Northern Hemisphere because wolves were the most widespread carnivore in that area. There have been a lot of stories in literature and just generally making out that wolves are the big bad beast and something to be frightened of.
So how did we go from that to killing wolves? Well, you got to flash forward about 12,000 years. Now we are no longer hunter and gatherers. Now we are starting to be agriculturalists. We're tending crops. We're raising livestock. Now when a wolf comes in and does what it does naturally, which is find the easiest prey possible, that prey might be one of our livestock. And when that happens, it's taking food right out of that person's mouth. That would not be allowed. So instead of cooperating, we became competitors. And we started killing wolves 8,000-9,000 years ago, and we haven't stopped.
Wolves have certainly been vilified. They are the most malign creature ever, with entire cultures, demonization centered around their history.
So you have this whole rise of a kind of demonic version of what a wolf is, you know, at a time that the church wants to protect its commercial interests. And this demon wolf, this something that's dark in our subconscious, I think really starts there, with the security of grasp of the Catholic Church and Christianity, and with the development of Christianity throughout Western Europe. What you see is that fear of this idea as being a satanic thing, becoming something that's completely implanted in people's minds, and indeed is still there today.
Jesus speaks of sending out his disciples like lambs among sheep. And he tells people to beware of people coming in as false prophets in wolves' clothing. I think what Jesus was doing, preaching to the people at the time, was they had sheep. They knew the danger of wolves coming in and stealing their sheep. They knew the problem of losing sheep. Jesus was a good shepherd to protect them against these wolves. Once Jesus used that image, and again it's simplifying, I think that's when the wolf becomes vilified. It's now not a creature following its natural habits, it's now an evil creature. And I think that Christianity then spreading carried with it this image of the wolf as a powerful predator, but an evil predator. If we think about how people respond emotionally to wolves, how they think about them, an interesting issue is our domestic dogs have come from wolves. And yet wolves as a pack do things against humans in an important sense. They eat their sheep, they eat their cattle, etc., etc. In a sense, a wolf is a dog gone wrong. So the wolf should be man's best friend, human's best friend, and these are deviants. Now, of course, they existed before domesticated dogs. So I think we do have the issue of an intense personal concern for our individual dog, and we don't get dogs living in packs. We keep them individually. So it's the far end of the wolf and its natural pack, and we've selected for these to be individuals. We don't want our domesticated dogs to act as a pack.
Wolves, basically do just a few things. They hunt, they mate, they raise their young, and they disperse. That's it. Everything else we put on wolves. We give them characteristics that don't fit because it fits with who we are as humans.
It's shocking to uncover the extent of persecution the wolf has been subjected. Complete extinction in the UK and near extinction in other countries. Does our hatred of wolves extend across the entire human population? Is our hatred justified by the level of damage they cause? And is this an accurate representation of the wolf? I wasn't buying this, so I decided to look at other countries that have wild populations of wolves and learn more about the attitudes. What's the situation for wolves in these countries and how are they managed? Are they still persecuted? And if they return to the UK, are they destined for the same fate?
Wolf could soon be taken off the endangered species list nationwide.
The Republic of Yakutia has declared a war on wolves.
Since 2012, state officials have been resorting to killing the animals.
Gray wolf could soon be taken off the endangered species list entirely.
While the gray wolf population has grown into the thousands, it's still a fraction of the wolf packs that once inhabited North America.
Well, the Trump administration is now working to lift endangered species protections for gray wolves in the lower 48 states. This could be approved by the end of the year.
The iconic gray wolf will no longer be considered endangered.
I'd watched numerous documentaries about wolves. One in particular really stood out to me, Medicine of the Wolf by Julia Huffman, because the attitude to helping wolves in this film was similar to my own, and she's investigated hunting, which I didn't fully understand. I was curious to know what response she had to her film to further understand the attitudes of the public to wolves.
There's, 206 million cattle in Montana. There's less than 1,000 wolves. I think I'm just going to throw out a number there. I think in 2017, there were 90 issues where a wolf took a cow or a sheep. Okay. So you got 2.6 million cattle. You have less than 1,000 wolves. Then you have 90 issues where there were wolf cattle or wolf sheep. So you can imagine what the percentage is. It's less than 1% of issues. But if you look at publications in those areas, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, if you read the stories that they publish when a wolf is killed, where a wolf is taken, where a wolf is trapped, etc. I mean, just if you did a little research and just started reading these articles, those bigger numbers are never printed, right? So the public continues to get pushed with this propaganda, right? That these wolves are taking out all the livestock, and these wolves are, they're problems.
Wolf depredations on livestock are extremely rare, especially in the overall view of what's killing livestock. And wolves barely measure less than 1% of livestock losses in heavy wolf country. There is so much conflict over wolves, and it drives the conversation. And it's like the media just focuses on the conflict, which compounds it, because if all you hear about with wolves is the conflict aspects of it, so a wolf kills 6 sheep or a wolf kills a cow, and that becomes the only message that gets out to the public, they think that the wolves are just decimating, livestock herds, and that's not true.
There has been a problem with the kind of information that has been offered the public over the years. It's propaganda in so many cases by people who really hate wolves, making the general public afraid of wolves.
At one time, we had somewhere between 750,000 wolves in North America, and we had whittled that down. This many were roaming in North America, and then all of a sudden, fast forward to, we almost eradicated the wolf in the 70s. In fact, most people don't know that's the reason why the Endangered Species Act was originally put in place. It was originally put in place because we almost wiped the wolf out entirely. It was an emergency situation when wolves were put on the endangered species list. Some people who are, have done extensive work about wolves, and some people who are even wolf scientists and biologists believe that if we allow the public at times to hunt the wolf, that somehow it's going to create an acceptance for the animal. I can't, in my mind, I can't hold the two together. I can't see that we need to sport hunt the wolf, which means these incredibly inhumane things where we are trapping these animals and they're strangled to death and they try to chew their feet off, and they die these horrible, horrible, cruel deaths. How we can somehow frame that in a way that is going to make the public want to protect wolves and care more about the wolves, I'm sorry, for me, that doesn't add up.
To think of the ways that they're treated, the awful, awful thought of wolves being caught in leg hold traps and lying there in days in agony, being shot, and the most recent ruling by Fish and Wildlife in some states that you can gas or poison wolves when they've got cubs in the burrow, and you can gas the burrows, if I'm right. And it's just shocking.
Humans certainly hunt wolves for pest control. Shepherds will shoot wolves that come near to them. They'll put poison out for wolves. They'll put snares out for wolves. But wolf is still a creature that is hunted. It's hunted in many areas in Eastern Europe. Alaska allows wolf hunting, and that's for trophies. So what you're looking for is a large male that you can have the skin on the floor, you can have the head on your wall, and that is about trophy hunting. That's about you pitting your wits against this predator.
That goes pretty deep, because that then becomes about identity, as a person's identity. And if that identity is based on this Wild West image, John Wayne thing of, in order to be out in nature, we've got to control every bit, and we've got to, the predators are bad, and we can show that we are in control of nature by killing the predators. That's a basic dysfunctional relationship with nature that works against them.
When I'm lucky enough to see a wolf in the wild, that's what I consider myself to be, lucky. And I want to be able to see that wolf again and again and again. So killing it doesn't fit into my way of thinking at all.
People who need to fill up some kind of void in their lives, that's my opinion, need to go out with guns. They need to go out with, ATVs, and they need to destroy something like the wolf to somehow feel better about who they are. And there's a lot of money in that. Organizations that, you can go and buy a license from, they profit from that. And so there's a big machine that's happening.
So to be able to prove that you are part of that Western iconic culture, do you have to hate predators, especially wolves and grizzly bears? It's been such a strong myth that's been told so many times. People believe that it's true, that the only way that you can have these animals out there is to kill them.
It was clear to me, it was evident that humans came to view wolves as competitors for land, livestock, grazing and farming. But it's barbaric to think here, in the 21st century, that these draconian practices need to continue as accepted and unchallenged practice. I was struggling to understand how hunting could be effective for wolf conservation and management strategy. The evidence seems to indicate that perhaps a lot of the time wolves are just being hunted because people enjoy hunting them. So I wanted to know, is hunting just something that is going to carry on regardless? Or are there any innovative alternatives with the aim of coexistence?
Every state in the United States that has wolves has a wolf management plan that's been approved by the federal government. That says, here's how we're going to manage wolves. Frankly, managing is another word for killing in most of these states. But if you look at the basic premise behind each of these plans, it is this. If there's a conflict between livestock and wolves, it's the wolf's fault and the wolf's got to pay. I think that premise is wrong.
The situations around the cull, I understand the principle behind what people feel, that wolves grow in numbers, they get too big for areas, they go outside of those areas, and subsequently there has to be a form of management or containment. The objection that I have is the way the management is done.
The difficulty, I think, comes where you don't have that sort of space, where you have conflict. I think wolf re-emergence can be managed. So in Germany, they got hold of the stakeholders, hunters, farmers, members of the public, ecologists, etc., etc., etc. The wolves are coming back. We've got to have a management plan. But where we see wolves emerging and what's there now, the success or the failure, whether wolves are going to be allowed to exist, where they're going to be allowed to exist, depends on the coming together of different community interests.
The basic elements of dealing with human-wildlife conflict are the same. It's just the species change and the ways that you can coexist with them change. but not this people, right? The people are pretty much the same everywhere, even when the cultural changes are different.
I'm against wolves being killed on principle because there is an alternative, and an alternative that works. I don't think the cull works for us. It only reduces numbers, but it can panic the wolves into just moving to other areas for different resources that they need to repair the damage.
If you shoot just wolves because you think there are too many, then you get a very different problem, because the male and the female in a territory, they play a very, very important role. They hunt together for red deer, for instance. If you shoot one of the adults, then the rest of the pack can't hunt for red deer anymore. Normally that means that the pack is disintegrating, and that everybody is going to search for its own food. And then the adult female can easily live off roe deer or whatever, but the young ones, they can't. And they all go to sheep hunting, because that's the best alternative food. So what you do is you kill one adult, and you get, well, 4 or 5 problem wolves in return.
But people with guns can't manage deer populations in the way that a local wolf population would. Now, in addition to obviously preying on the animals and keeping numbers down by that factor, whilst living in proximity to an apex predator, the behavior of the prey animals will change significantly. So they will spend less time grazing. They will spend less time breeding. If they are ill or injured, they are more likely to be taken out by a hunting wolf pack.
They keep their own population at a certain level, because big territorial wolves don't allow other wolves to enter their territory, so they kill each other. And that's kind of law of the jungle.
If you only use killing wolves as your solution, and you don't address the underlying problems that cause the livestock to be vulnerable in the first place, then more wolves will move into that system. And we've seen it over and over and over again. It just cycles through that same conflict over and over and over. Livestock die, wolves die, livestock die, wolves die. I mean, it's just this constant spiral of conflict.
Wolves live on public land. That's the only home left to them in the United States, is public land. Unfortunately, livestock producers get to graze their livestock on public lands at a discount. It's cheaper to do it that way. So if you've got wolves living on public land because that's the only place they can live, and you've got livestock coming in even greater numbers on public land because it's cheaper for the producers to do it that way, you're inviting conflict. Can wolves be managed non-lethally? Yes, emphatically yes. I would venture a guess that any major livestock producer in the U.S. knows about, even if they don't use, they know that there are non-lethal ways to deal with keeping wolves and livestock separate and alive. Really simple things that don't cost a lot of money. And if they do cost money, there are both state agencies and private conservation agencies that will help offset the cost of using non-lethal deterrents. So to my mind, there's no reason in the world to kill wolves when you have all these non-lethal deterrents.
So the non-lethal approach to managing wolves really looks at the world through the wolf's eyes. It's really about just giving the wolves a sense of risk near livestock, and then making sure that they have a way of avoiding livestock. So the philosophy behind the non-lethal is that we have ways that we can work with nature. What we're doing is changing the situation so that they don't have an attraction to the livestock, and that they have a way of peacefully coexisting with livestock operations on the landscape. You know, we're in year 13 right now of the Wood River Wolf Project. We have had, upwards of 25,000 sheep in our project area, up to 3 or 4 wolf packs, some that come in and out, but stable wolf packs in the project area. And we lose on average 4 sheep a year, which is nothing compared to what they have normally lost to coyotes and bears and mountain lions that have always been here. And we're spending less money doing these methods than they were spending killing wolves before. What we decided to do is to say, let's not follow that. That's clearly a failed system. It's not working for anyone. Let's see if we can find something that works for everyone. And the non-lethal coexistence strategies work for everyone. Most of the ranchers we work with would prefer not to have wolves on a landscape. It's one more headache to them. When we can show them that these methods better protect their livestock, they have fewer losses, and we don't have to kill wolves because these losses are so manageable, they're so minimal, it changes the whole dynamic. Now, over long term, that's a sustainable system.
The attitude of people in the community just aren't changing enough to tip the balance in favour of the wolf. Or address the attitude of the hunting community that wolves are more valuable dead than alive. Wolf management is a great way to go. It makes sense. And it seems there's so much interest, but it's taking so long. I wanted to know about wolf conservation in general, and whether or not that at least was progressing. I'd spent quite some time following the reintroduction of wolves at Yellowstone National Park, where Doug Smith is the senior wildlife biologist and project leader for the Yellowstone Wolf Project. He's studied wolves for over 23 years, producing numerous publications.
Wolf conservation is thriving, but I'm not optimistic. And so those things are contradictory. And I'll explain why. 50 years ago, we had no wolves in any place in the lower 48, the continental United States, except Minnesota. And now we have them in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Arizona, New Mexico. Europe, wolves have increased almost everywhere. There's wolves in France. I meant, Poland's filled with wolves. Germany's filled with wolves. Eastern Europe has lots. They've increased everywhere. So why am I pessimistic? Because human attitudes have only changed a little. Not so long ago, everybody hated wolves. Now only half of them do, but it's still a human-dominated planet. And so where these wolves have showed up, there's big management problems, and people are taking matters into their own hands. And wildland, which is in space, which is what wolves and other wildlife need, is getting encroached upon by humans. And so I have a hard time with facsimiles of nature. I want real nature. And Europe, to me, is a facsimile of nature. There's 400 million people in Western Europe, and it's smaller than the United States. The United States has 325 million, but there's big areas where there's no people and wolves can be. And I'm worried about those areas because people are not accepting of it. And I think there's compromise that can be had. And we're pretty far away from that compromise. So on one hand, I'm hopeful because we've had more wolves than we've ever had before. I think human attitudes, I used to think they could be changed by science and facts and data, but I was wrong. They're not. Humans need emotions, they need stories, and we need to talk about wolves in that way. We need to talk about individual wolf lives, and we need to indicate to people that they're not that bad and that we can live with them. But we got to stop taking over everything. And that's where I'm worried that we're not going to do it. Because the history of people is just take. And the wolf is the one animal that said stop. And what do? Killed them. And so I think we find that solution seductive. So we're going to do that again.
I definitely think wolf conservation is progressing, and every other conservation. But we've got to make sure that we learn the lessons indirectly as well as directly.
I'd like to say that I think that conservation is pretty good right now, but I see it, in my own opinion, as an ongoing fight. We've got agriculture, we've got land loss, we've got habitat loss, we've got human expansion, and unfortunately the wolf is suffering considerably at the hands of man. So I'd like to say conservation is pretty good, but I'd say it's an ongoing fight.
The aims and ambitions of wolf conservation will remain consistent because there are plenty of people that feel passionately about that particular issue. Things that challenge wolf conservation are public attitudes and perceptions. Generally speaking, that there is a great deal of work to be done with regard to wolf conservation, particularly when you're looking at reintroducing wolves to areas where they're currently extinct. And many of the challenges are social and political, in addition to being huge logistical challenges.
The most important area of wolf conservation is the ability to respect everything about it. Behaviorism isn't going to give us all the answers we need about conserving wolves. Neither is ecology, neither is biology. I think only when we begin to join these forces together, respect one another's work, then we'll see the results in wolf conservation. So my true belief is that we need all aspects of wolf conservation.
By this time, the evidence I was gathering began to reveal that wolf hate was just the surface for something so much bigger. It was becoming apparent that wolf conservation was as much about affecting a change in attitude as well as the perception of the wolf. Why is it so difficult for people to change? And what's the impact on wolves in the environment?
We've come in an industrial revolution, in my opinion. We've come in and we've put a price on everything. And we've claimed the land, and we've abused the land and our animals. And now we seem to have this ownership.
There's more wolves in Europe than there have been in the last 50 years. And I think that this is very important because it's symbolic of how we live in this world. How do we relate to other life forms? Are we just going to use the world as our taking and convert all the land to agriculture and farmland to raise animals, or we are going to share it with other creatures? And animals that are really hard to live with, inconvenient, and actually can detract from our economic activity are the real test. And I don't think that it's ethical to do away with an entire species. I don't think it makes the world very interesting. And in the end, I think it will do us in. And so the wolf is kind of a message to us to slow down, to be reasonable, to pull back. We're not going to make it with 10, 11, 12 billion people on Earth. Is that the way we want the world to be? And so these are important questions about our future, what the world's going to look like. And it's going to be pretty bad and pretty unpleasant if it's just people piled on top of people. We already know what that looks like. India, China, etc. Wolves represent us saying, stop. What are we doing? Wolves remind us of, leave some things alone.
Wolves for me represent a look at us, but past us. We are very good at measuring progress on everything that goes forward, but progress is measured in what we remember, what was our history, what was back in time. And I think to understand the connection between the two of us, we have to look back at how we began. So the wolf for me gives us a look at how we used to be, how we should be, to balance what is becoming an ever growing world that's losing every day social and emotional ability with one another. Wolves give us a look at how that began and how we can maintain it and get it back.
Unfortunately, at this time in our history, there's so many animals that have gone extinct. And we're wiping them out at such an incredibly fast rate. It's alarming to me.
This planet is plummeting off the edge of a precipice. Life is leaching from it, the globe over, in a way that most of us simply can't even begin to appreciate. It's dying. 95% of the vertebrate biomass of this earth are humans and domestic animals. We need wildlife.
You look at the world right now and we're crying for whales, we're crying for elephants, giraffes, wolves, buffaloes. Why are we crying? Why are we upset about that? It's that this beautiful planet that we're on, we have disconnected from the world, wild kingdom. We've disconnected from those animals. But I think these animals are crying to us, you know, to wake up. And it's down to where we have just developed that outside the door is them, inside the house is us, and we've forgotten actually we're them too. You know, we're animals, we're life forms, and so we miss the understanding of that we are not apart from the environment. We are the environment. We're part of it.
My partner surprised me with a trip to Wildwood Escott in Exeter. Wildwood is on a mission to rewild certain species that are missing from the ecosystem and provide a range of opportunities that influence public perception through education and exposure to these animals. They have a pack of wolves and want the public to come around to the prospect of living with wolves again. The wolf is a keystone species and known as an ecological engineer. When removed from an environment, the food web collapses, causing imbalance in species populations. This is known as a trophic cascade. For example, without the wolf, the elk's population will increase, which means a higher demand on food sources such as vegetation. The environment goes into decline, resulting in less rodents, less birds, and less fish. Ultimately, every species will suffer when the circle is incomplete, thus affecting the environment as a whole.
Rewilding is the mass restoration of both animals and plant life to an area that once perhaps had both those things.
Rewilding is a process, it's an approach, it's how we orient ourselves to the natural world.
There would be a range of public benefits as far as rewilding is concerned. There is the fact that you have an interesting landscape, a landscape where other things live, where you take your kid for a walk on the beach and a golden eagle, you know, floats 6 feet over your kid's head. You have spectacles, you have landscape where water is held and slowed and trapped, perhaps by beavers that are very rich in life.
The question of rewilding is quite a tricky one because people have preconceptions about what rewilding means. And many will assume that it simply means just letting nature get on with it, but that's not the case. That's not a productive approach to rewilding.
The British landscape is a landscape that's been entirely dominated by humans since approximately the Bronze Age. And if you think that's not the case, then just have a look at it from Google Earth, and what you'll see are field patterns, modern field patterns everywhere. But underneath that, even in areas of heathland, you know, perhaps that we consider to be remote, like Exmoor or Purbeck or the New Forest, Modern advances in LiDAR show us that those areas were all cultivated as well. So the landscape has been entirely dominated, entirely manipulated by people.
If you imagine wild spaces to be on a continuum, so at one end of the continuum you have a barren monoculture with very low biodiversity, and at the other end you have a fully rich biodiverse environment with all the room and resources for a full range of animal populations.
The United Kingdom, though it looks very, very green from the sky, is incredibly barren. Basically, you're looking down from the sky, it looks beautiful and green, but there's really nothing going on down there apart from fields and a few hedges. Very, very barren uplands, and we've got around 10% wooded uplands compared to Europe, which is around 30%. So you can see that we're actually lacking a lot of the forests that we should have.
On that continuum, we're closer to the barren monoculture than we would like to be.
England needs rewilding in general. It needs environmental rewilding. It needs land usage to change.
And we've just about finished farming now, because at the end of the day it made no money and it did tremendous ecological harm. With the modern drugs we have, the effective insecticides like the ivermectins, the chemicals you put on the land, the stocking rates of animals you're obliged to run if you're trying to produce any kind of profit. We did bad things. This idea that we need to farm every inch of Britain because we're going to starve because there are going to be U-boats in the western approaches is utter nonsense. I mean, everything that happens in this world, for good or ill, is part of a global economy.
We live in an unusual situation in the UK, don't we? We don't have any large predators in our landscape, and we've been living without them for an awfully long time. We've become very cosy. And when you think about it, the largest predators in our landscape are our pets, our domestic dogs. Badgers are slightly heavier than foxes. They're omnivores. I wouldn't consider them a full-on predator. So the fox is probably our biggest land predator, and they weigh about, 6 to 8 kilograms. They're tiny. They're smaller than my poodles, and yet we can't get along with foxes. We still harbour all of these lunatic ideas about their behaviour, and we still persecute them wholly unnecessarily. We still tear them to pieces with dogs, actually. So the wolf is a real challenge. It's a real challenge for us, I think, because there's a long history of mistrust, a human history of mistrust, not a British history of mistrust. I would love to think that in my lifetime we might have an opportunity to reintroduce these animals in a controlled manner to the UK, where they could actually play a very important ecological role. I fear that because of that inherent mistrust and the enormous amount of ignorance that surrounds the species, to this day, very sadly, that won't happen. It's a pleasure to go, as I have just been, to places like Yellowstone National Park and Grand Teton, where wolves have been reintroduced successfully, and see them playing out that role and seeing how they have reshaped through their predatory activities that entire ecosystem. It's extraordinary to be there. In fact, it's very disheartening to be there and then to come home and look at our highly modified landscape, which isn't functional, where we've got way too many deer because we don't have any large predators, lynx or wolf, and therefore we're never going to achieve that sort of balance. It's a pity, but I think until we were ever able to win over the hearts and minds of the hunting, shooting, landowning fraternity, and the farmers, of course, then we're going to have a hard job bringing wolves back to the UK.
If you're researching rewilding on the internet, it won't be long before you find Paul Lister. He's the custodian of Allerdale, a 23,000-acre wilderness reserve. He's also founder of the European Nature Trust. His mission is to return wolves to this wilderness. I wanted to talk to him about his efforts to restore the land to its native environment, the role the wolf plays in this, and any challenges from those opposing his plans.
The vision for what we have up in Allerdale, and we call it a reserve and not an estate. We want to sort of differentiate ourselves from places that are run under sort of a normal Victorian management regime of hunting, shooting, fishing. We consider ourselves like more of a nature reserve. And the vision has always been to create a large-scale fenced reserve. I've never ever thought of releasing wolves into the wild. It's only ever been into something a 50,000 acre plus area. much like dozens of game reserves in South Africa.
So Paul thinks you could combine restoring wolves in big enclosures to help control red deer, to help restore the forests, and then at the same time, maybe create a tourism business like Yellowstone.
You know, you only have to go to Yellowstone on most days of the year to realize just how many wolf watchers there are, people out trying to see wolves or panthers or bears or what have you.
Now, the walkers, the people who walk through the landscape, don't like this, but Paul thinks that could be solved. I think all of what I just said is possible. You know, you might start off with sterilized wolves, so if they get out, they won't reproduce. But if you put radio collars on them, you could find them again. And this would be a very controlled experiment, and it might work. Free-ranging wolves, no. Maybe, you know, Scotland, in the way that Paul's talking about.
All my research up to this point seems to be leading me to the same thing: disconnection. It's almost like I've been looking in all the wrong places, trying to find out why people don't like wolves, or why they like them so much. I wanted to find out more about our disconnection with nature in general.
To some degree, we are all subject to nature deficit disorder. And this is one other aspect that we may need to highlight. How being disconnected from nature is impacting our life, our way of behaving, our perception of things, our perception of others, and importantly, how this is critically and dramatically, in some cases, impacting the new generations. The more the technology is taking space and place in our lives, the less we spend time outdoor, the less kids grow by being dirty in the soil and climbing the trees.
There's things like the ingredients, the pesticides, the chemicals, all the artificiality of life that we engage with without really much of a second thought is impacting on our connection to nature. We're not connected to nature, we're connected to industrialized living. Dealing with that is the first process. The second one, beginning to establish some kind of a relationship with nature, even at a knowledge level. You know, do you know what the trees are in the forest where you walk? Do you know what the insects are in the forest that you walk in, or in the field that you walk in? What kind of relationship do you have? You know, do you understand the biology of the natural world around you? How much of it do you understand?
You know, one of the things that was really interesting in life is somebody said to me once, oh, the wings of a butterfly affect the whole world. Well, if that's the case, a wolf or a bear or something gets shot, that affects the world. And that's exactly what's happening.
It works against us because we're fighting nature, which is, you know, like trying to fight the weather, right? So you're trying to fight the sun coming up in the morning, right? It's much bigger than us. We're causing dire impact back to ourselves.
It's very difficult to get people to understand and want to protect something unless they've actually been there and worked it out for themselves. Getting people out into nature and out of the concrete cities is, I think, very important.
I think the biggest lesson that the wolf teaches us is balance. And our world and our society is very badly out of balance. And it's so out of balance that we don't know how to rebalance it. I think the combination of science and tribal thinking and tribal cultural thinking can help us rebalance that. And I think our reconnection with the wolf in its natural environment can help teach us that. Balance is critical right now. Finding a way of getting back to balance is critical for our survival and for the survival of the planet. And I think if we begin to understand on a deeper level our relationship with the wolf and what it can be, but more importantly, what the wolf's relationship to the ecology around it can be, we can begin to learn that and take some of those steps and begin to educate people and use that as an example of, you know, the decisions that we make and the choices that we make.
Wolves can help us to understand nature in many ways. I think to truly understand that, we have to almost rewrite the history of the wolf. Rather than thinking them as co-hunters or co-protectors, we need to start thinking about their social and emotional connection to us. And that's the strongest of all. And it's hard to see in a modern society that technologically is growing every day. But when we look back to our past, we look back to how we began, how we formed unions with one another, it was the wolf that gave us all of that. There's been, for some decades, a new revering of the wolf. The wolf is there at the center of it as a very charismatic, powerful creature. And I think that it's a very important symbol when it reappears. For many people, those who are pro-wolf, pro-environment, pro-conservation, they believe that the reemergence of the wolf is a symbol that we're turning back to a proper relationship with nature that's been destroyed by human activity.
As I emerged from the mythologies, the misconceptions and misinformation, I was definitely getting a better idea of the true nature of the wolf. But this felt more like learning about the wolf as perceived by humans, rather than understanding their interactions with each other, their behaviour apart and distinct from humans. So my journey had brought me in reach of wolves, but always behind bars or fences or talking to experts. I needed to see them up close and personal, in their own environment and with each other. I went to visit the UK Wolf Conservation Trust in Reading. I'd heard they were closing soon, and to say farewell, they were holding a talk about grey wolf conservation. I thought it would be a great opportunity to learn more about the true character of the wolf.
So my husband and I in the 1970s sought to get a wolf cub to be able to see whether this was actually true, whether wolves did have these characteristics or not. Because we've had wolves, probably 20 in all, over this period, we have been able to see that it is completely untrue that wolves are very nervous of people. And so therefore we've been able to, through the Wolf Trust and people coming to see the wolves, change people's perceptions about this.
Dave Meach is a wildlife biologist specialising in the study of wolves. He's also the founder of the International Wolf Centre.
The project that I found the most interesting and enjoyed the most was my opportunity for 25 summers to live with a pack of wolves on Ellesmere Island that were unafraid of me and unafraid of people in general. I think that alpha term, which we no longer use, it implies that the wolf is within the family even aggressive, so that it makes it seem like in order for the wolf to mate and have pups and all, that it has to be aggressive to all other wolves. That isn't the case. All the wolf needs to do to have a pack is to find a member of the opposite sex and mate with that animal and produce offspring just like any other species has to do. The idea that the wolf has to fight to get to the top in order to produce a family, that is not true. And I think that term has kind of made the public think the wolf is more aggressive than it really is. It is a carnivore. It does have to kill other animals to eat, to live, but generally it is not dangerous to humans. Canada, for example, has had about 60,000 wolves for many, many years. They've never been endangered there, yet people camp and hike and swim and fish and hunt and everything in Canada without any danger to wolves.
Now we have better cameras that you can film wolves at night, obviously much more magnification. people have been able to record wolves and back this up to show that they really are just enigmatic, charismatic animals who are going about just surviving and living, and they're not a menace to people.
As humans, most of us, though we don't like to admit it, we do a lot of our decision making based on emotion rather than reasoning. It's our job to recognize those emotions and to provide people with sufficient information to adjust their perspective with regard to the behavior of wolves and the characteristics of wolves. A short amount of experience with the wolves will adjust that perception quite significantly.
And the more people realize that their beloved dogs are actually no different genetically or very little different from wolves, and wolves have many of the same qualities as domestic dogs. I mean, they're loyal, they're fantastic parents, they look after their cubs, they're willing to risk their lives.
If they can actually get to see a wolf close up, there's no greater way than that in changing people's perception, in coming and understanding that they are timid, charming animals that actually all dogs are related from. I think, thousands of people have gone away from the Wolf Trust here realising that the wolves are very misunderstood.
I've met wolves that have been brought up from pups. They can't be released in the wild, and I've been to wolf sanctuaries. And when you actually meet a wolf and look into their eyes, it's an extraordinary feeling.
Character of the wolf is it's a social animal, has a favorable approach to its family, but in order to earn a living, they have to be aggressive toward prey. So those characteristics, they seem like they're in opposition. That is, the wolf is friendly towards its pack members, but aggressive towards prey. But that's just because it's the way that animal has to live. So it has this kind of a dualistic personality, if you will. When you watch wolves with their pack mates, which are basically their relatives, their offspring, they get along very well. They do end up killing other neighboring packs at times, and strange wolves. So they do have that aggressive nature towards others. They're competitive. So I guess I would say friendly towards their own pack, competitive with other packs, and aggressive to prey.
The Wolf and Dog Development Centre is a research and educational facility specialising in canine, social and emotional development. This is run by Sean and Kim Ellis, who together share an extensive range of knowledge and experience with wolves. Sean possesses unique insight into wolf behaviour and family relationships. This is from living with wolves in captivity. I decided it was about time I went to visit Sean and Kim.
It's about being equal through being different.
Yeah.
They gain their equality and their respect of one another because they respect that each personality is different, but they all support one another. We've looked at the whole hierarchical up and down. We see them more as a side by side and overlapped, where every single personality is respected for the role and the job that it does.
We're too good at putting the same across everything. We're trying to teach our children to be the same across the board, and that's something that the wolves really teach us beautifully, is to acknowledge us for our individual characters, which means our capabilities and our limitations. We don't all learn the same, we don't all behave the same.
I think in itself, the communication and the behaviour isn't enough. Unless we processed the same information in the same way, unless we lived as a wolf, it wouldn't make any difference what our sensory was. And it's the same with the dogs, we feel. We don't connect with them as we should because we don't allow ourselves to.
But the thing that we as humans can do is we can change our behavior. A wolf really can't change its behavior. It's a wild animal. That's what it does to survive. We as humans, on the other hand, we have much more intelligence. We have much more flexibility. We have much more adaptability than wolves do. And then it's up to us to realize that we're the ones that have to change. And we are the ones who have to work at coexisting with wolves and, of course, other species as well. Plenty of people who will tell you they love wolves. They'd do anything for them. But I think more of those people need to be present at really important meetings regarding wolves. I have heard from both legislators, political and public officials, and committee members, say with the Fish and Wildlife Committee, it is so important. If they're going to get legislation passed, they need to have people in the room saying, I support that legislation.
Join our efforts, and that's where we can meet, is on the emotional path, not on the rational one, right? And sometimes it's completely the other way around.
Don't take the lessons in the plastic in the ocean as being a problem in the sense of how much it is and we need to reduce that, but learn the lesson beyond the plastic. Learn the fact that there are other lives, other life forms on this world that we have to share with. So I think let's learn the equality that we need to from situations like this, and not just deal with the solutions to the problem, but actually deal with the concept behind the problem.
We can't necessarily hit it straight on because it's not going to solve it. Battling it out, in my opinion, doesn't always get the good results, but we need to do something.
We need to make some bridges and be as negotiators and trying to take the elements that can be in common in all of those voices.
I think only when we begin to join these forces together, respect one another's work, then we'll see the results in wolf conservation. So my true belief is that we need all aspects of wolf conservation to be able to look after them, to care for them, to give them the success they need. But it has to come from many different forms.
To some degree, that requires a certain amount of acceptance, meaning that we need to recognize the conflicts, the differences, and accept that there are those differences, and see how to smooth those differences down and how to facilitate a dialogue, right?
I think if both sides of the argument can agree that sound scientific thinking can lead to reasonable conclusions about the questions of rewilding.
Without being self-critical, we cannot move forward, right? And so when we believe in some values, and we strongly believe in those values and we advocate in name of those values, sometimes we become blind. Certainly, this is the time to raise the voice, but also to create acceptance and openness. With time, we can also move together towards a common direction.
What needs to be done is to promote objective science-based information that is not propaganda. And that's why I started the International Wolf Center. That's its main purpose, is to promote science-based objective information about wolves.
It's called 7 generations. You base a decision for now based on 4 generations behind you, but thinking of 7 generations in front. Meaning, if I have an enemy that's my tribal enemy, after 4 generations, I should let it go because I don't know what happened to start this thing. And I should let it go thinking that I could have peace in 7 generations. If we would think along those lines, we would have a better relationship with the animals.
Let's inspire. Let's reveal to those that have grown up in this entrenched hunting culture, that have come to believe that somehow we have domain over all of wildlife, and to try to slowly and very smartly shift the paradigm. These different ways of moving in the world to educate people and to tell stories and to create these coalitions for wolf restoration rather than wolf management and wolf recovery.
To be quite honest, that starts in schools. So I think it starts in the classroom. What we need to do is to start to get some really good wildlife education into the classroom. That is a really, really good starting point, and kids will take that information with them as they get older, and then they will feed that on to friends and family and their own children.
So as an advocate, I ask myself this question all the time: how do I change that culture? And what I come down to is I change it one mind at a time. In the early 1920s, there was a professional wolf hunter. He was a wolf killer paid by the state of New Mexico to reduce the wolf population. This was a time in the United States when wolves were being eradicated. His name was Aldo Leopold, and he was very good at his job. You know, he talked about just having a really itchy trigger finger. I mean, this is a classic hunter, right? But one day he got up to a wolf he had shot and watched it die. And he wrote about this, and he wrote about watching the green fire die in this majestic animal's eyes. And the essay that he wrote ended up being published in 1949. That book is called the Sand County Almanac. In that book, he explains why our treatment of animals at the time, killing off predators, was wrong, and still is, of course. He became known as the grandfather of wildlife ecology, Aldo Leopold. So his changing his mind helped to change thousands and thousands of other minds.
The public can help wolves by opening their mind, opening their mutual respect of one another. We've seen the bad side of the wolf when it comes into contact with domestic livestock, communities that fear them. But the wolf is simply trying to survive. It needs things that maybe only our world can provide.
I was taught as a child by my dog, Rusty, and he's behind me here on the shelf. And he's the one who really taught me that we're part of the animal kingdom, not separated from it, and that we're not alone in having personalities, minds, and above all, emotions, and feeling pain. And these wolves are probably even more sentient, or perhaps not more than dogs, but at least as much as. And so they're capable of mental as well as physical suffering. The cubs will suffer if one or both parents are killed. The parents will suffer if the cubs are killed. And they suffer as much as your beloved dog. I think that's a very important point to get across. They're thinking, feeling, they're sentient beings. They feel fear, despair, and pain, but they can also feel joy and compassion and altruism.
My wolf journey while making this film has been long, confusing, yet enlightening. Humans have masked the wolf in superstition, lies and fairy tales, while persecuting this animal to the brink of extinction. But to what end? Life doesn't function as a hierarchy of superior and inferior forms. It's cyclical, a tree of great diversity. Wolves don't just represent the wilderness, they are the wilderness, and continue to communicate their message to let them heal the natural world and revive the earth. The time has come to unmask the wolf and give them back to nature.